My grandmother called me one afternoon, and when I heard her voice, I knew something was wrong. She was 74 years old, sharp as a tack her whole life, raised 4 children on her own, never complained about anything. But that day she told me she had just handed over $11,000 to a man she had known for only 3 weeks, a man who said he loved her. A man who had memorized every word she ever said, mirrored her body language perfectly, laughed at all her jokes, and made her feel like she was 25 again. By the time she called me, he was already gone. I spent 15 years as a behavioral consultant, training FBI agents and corporate negotiators to read people, detect deception, and protect themselves from manipulation. And even with everything I knew, I almost did not catch it in time for my own grandmother. Because here is what nobody tells you. The people who are most dangerous are not the ones who look dangerous. They are the ones who look perfect. They are the ones who know exactly what to say, exactly when to touch your arm, exactly when to pause and let silence do the work for them. And they are very, very good at finding people who have never been taught to read the signals. That is why I am making this video today. Because if a retired behavioral expert almost missed it with his own grandmother, what chance does the average person have? The answer is zero, unless you learn what I am about to teach you. In the next 30 minutes, I am going to show you the exact same system I use to train federal investigators, and I'm going to break it down so clearly that you will be able to use it starting today. You will learn how to read micro-expressions, the involuntary flashes of emotion that last less than 1/5 of a second. You will learn the body language clusters that reveal what someone is truly thinking even when their words say something completely different. And at the end, I am going to show you the single most powerful protection against manipulation that researchers at Johns Hopkins University identified, and it is not what most people expect. Stay with me, because the people in your life right now, the ones you love, the ones you trust, some of them are wearing masks. And after today, you will finally be able to tell the difference. My name is Dr. James Harlow. I spent 22 years as a behavioral psychologist and criminal profiler consultant, working alongside federal agencies on fraud, deception, and high-stakes interrogation. Before that, I trained under some of the world's leading experts in nonverbal communication at the University of California. And like a lot of people in my field, I went into this work because of a personal loss. My grandmother was not the first person in my family to be deceived by someone they trusted completely. My mother was as well, and it changed everything for her. So I want to be very honest with you about why I am here. I am not selling supplements. I am not asking you to buy a course. I am here because I am watching a pattern that concerns me deeply. As people get older, as they retire, as their social circles change, they become targets. Not because they are weak, because they are kind, because they are trusting. Because nobody ever taught them that trust, without the skills to verify it, is a vulnerability. You are not broken. You are not naive. You were simply never given the tools that I am going to give you today. Now, before we go any deeper, I want to mention this. Every week I release a new video on behavioral psychology, practical people reading skills, and how to protect yourself and the people you love from manipulation and deception. If what I have shared so far resonates with you, consider subscribing, but only if you feel this is genuinely useful to you. I am here for the people who want to actually understand human behavior, not just watch videos about it. Let me start by explaining something that most people get completely backwards. Most of us were taught to listen to what people say. We were told that actions speak louder than words, but then we were trained our entire lives to focus on words. We sit in conversations analyzing sentences, weighing arguments, responding to the verbal content. Meanwhile, the real conversation is happening somewhere else entirely. Think of the human brain like an old house with 2 electrical systems. One was installed recently. That is your conscious verbal mind. It is logical, organized, and very good at constructing believable stories. The other system is ancient. It runs through your entire body. It operates below conscious awareness. and it is almost impossible to fully control. That ancient system is what researchers call the limbic system, and it is the source of every genuine emotion, every involuntary reaction, every truth that leaks out of a person whether they want it to or not. Here is the key insight that changed everything for me early in my career. The verbal system can lie with no effort at all. The limbic system almost never can. A person can look you in the eye and say the words calmly, confidently, with perfect grammar. But while those words are traveling from their mouth to your ears, their limbic system is broadcasting a completely different signal. A micro-tension around the eyes, a brief flash of contempt at the corner of the mouth, a slight lean of the feet toward the exit. And if you know where to look, you can read that signal as clearly as words on a page. That is what we are going to build today. Your ability to read the second conversation, the one that is always happening beneath the surface. Let me walk you through the most important framework in behavioral reading, and I call it the three-layer system. Layer 1 is the face, specifically micro-expressions. These are involuntary facial movements that last between 1/25th and 1/5 of a second. They are too fast for the person to control, and too fast for most observers to notice. But once you train your eye, you begin to catch them, and they reveal the real emotional state underneath the performance. There are 7 universal micro-expressions that have been identified across every human culture on Earth. Happiness, sadness, fear, anger, surprise, disgust, and contempt. Every one of them has a specific muscular signature, and every one of them tells you something critical about what the other person is actually feeling in that moment. The one I want you to pay the closest attention to is contempt, because contempt is the one that most people miss, and it is the one that most often predicts danger. Contempt looks like a very subtle one-sided pull at the corner of the mouth, just one side, not both. It is so small that most people process it as a smirk or a half smile and move on. But contempt is not warmth. Contempt is the emotional signature of superiority. It means the person believes they are above you in some way, that your opinion does not matter, that they are playing a game you do not even know you are in. When someone flashes contempt at you during a warm conversation, especially during a moment when you have just said something trusting or vulnerable, that is a red flag you should never ignore. Now let me tell you about Sandra. Sandra is 67 years old, a retired postal worker from Virginia. She came to one of my community workshops after her daughter had encouraged her to attend. She sat in the back row with her arms crossed and a polite, skeptical expression on her face. She told me afterward that she almost did not come because she did not think she needed to learn this kind of thing. She had, as she put it, been reading people her whole life. And then she described the man she had been dating for 4 months. As she talked, I noticed her language shift. She stopped using his name and started saying things like, "Well, he always makes me feel like I should be grateful." And, "I do not know. Sometimes I leave our conversations feeling smaller than when I arrived." And the thing that got to me was when she said, "His smile never quite reaches his eyes, but I always told myself I was imagining it." Sandra was not imagining it. Her limbic system had been picking up on the contempt micro-expression every single time and sending her a signal. But because nobody had ever validated that signal, because nobody had ever told her that what she was sensing was real and had a name and a meaning, she had been dismissing it for 4 months as her own insecurity. This is what the three-layer system does for you. It turns vague discomfort into clear data. It takes the feeling that something is off and gives you the vocabulary and the framework to name exactly what is off and why. Let me now move to layer 2 of the system, body language clusters. Here is the mistake that almost everyone makes with body language. They try to interpret one gesture at a time. Someone crosses their arms, and they immediately think, that person is being defensive. But that is not how behavioral reading works. A single gesture means almost nothing in isolation. What matters is the cluster. 3 or more signals appearing at the same time, reinforcing the same message. Think of it like this. One dark cloud does not mean a storm. But when you see dark clouds stacking on the horizon, the wind picking up, and the birds suddenly going quiet, those three things together tell you something clear. A classic defensive cluster looks like this: arms crossed, torso angled slightly away from you, feet pointing toward the nearest exit, eyes that track the room rather than settle on your face. Any one of those might mean nothing, but all four together, in a conversation where you have just asked a direct question or made a request, that cluster is telling you something very specific. The person wants to leave, or they want to end this conversation, or they are withholding something from you. Here is another cluster that people in my workshops always find eye-opening because they immediately think of someone specific in their life. I call it the dominance override. Standing or sitting with feet slightly wider than shoulder width, one or both hands on hips, or hands clasped behind the back, chin lifted just a few degrees above neutral. Slow, deliberate movements. This cluster signals that the person sees themselves as the authority in the room. It is not always negative. Leaders, surgeons, experienced teachers sometimes display it naturally. But when someone you just met is showing this cluster in a casual social conversation, it is worth noting. It suggests they have already decided the hierarchy. They have already decided you are below them. And people who enter every relationship from that position are almost always difficult, often manipulative, and rarely interested in genuine connection. The cluster I want you to memorize, though, is what I call the warmth cluster. And I want you to memorize it for two reasons. First, because recognizing genuine warmth helps you identify who is truly safe in your life. And second, because manipulators study it and mimic it, and knowing the real version helps you spot the imitation. Genuine warmth looks like this: open palms, facing slightly upward or toward you, relaxed shoulders sitting just below the ears, head tilted slightly to one side, which is a biological signal of non-threat, eyes that soften at the corners when they look at you, and I mean genuinely soften, not just the mouth smiling while the eyes stay flat, and mirroring. When two people are in authentic rapport, they naturally begin to mirror each other's posture, pace of speech, and even breathing rhythm. This is not something people do consciously. It is the limbic system communicating trust. The imitation of warmth is what trained manipulators learn to perform. And here is how you can tell the difference. Genuine warmth is consistent. It does not vary much, based on whether they need something from you or not. Performed warmth is triggered by specific circumstances. It intensifies when they want something, and it fades during moments when they are not actively working on you. Watch the variation. The person who is only warm when they have a request, who turns cold or distracted in the quiet, ordinary moments. That variation is the tell. Now, I want to talk about something that comes up in almost every workshop I run, and that is the question of the voice. Most people think body language is only about what the body does. But the voice is part of the body too, and it is one of the most revealing channels we have. The technical term is paralanguage, which simply means everything about speech that is not the words themselves. The pitch, the pace, the pauses, the volume, the texture of the sound. When someone is telling the truth from memory, their speech has a natural, organic quality to it. They might pause. They might say, "Wait, let me think about this." They might correct themselves. "Actually, no. I think it was Tuesday, not Wednesday." These small imperfections are the signature of real memory retrieval. When someone is constructing a lie, the speech pattern changes. The brain is working overtime. It is inventing content, monitoring your reaction, suppressing the true memory, and managing the verbal performance all at the same time. That cognitive load creates very specific vocal patterns. Slightly longer, pauses before answers, not because they are remembering, but because they are building. Unusually smooth delivery in sections that should have more natural variation. And a subtle but detectable increase in pitch especially on key claims, because the stress response tightens the vocal cords. Here is a practical technique I teach called the baseline then deviate method. In any conversation where you want to assess truthfulness, spend the first few minutes asking questions you know the person can answer comfortably and honestly. What did you do this weekend? How long have you lived here? These questions build a vocal baseline. You learn what their natural rhythm sounds like. Then, when you ask something that touches a sensitive truth, you are listening for deviation from that baseline. A pitch shift, a pace change, a sudden increase in qualifiers like, well, I mean, kind of, sort of, you know. Those deviations are the voice telling you something the words are trying to hide. T307. So that is the mechanism. Now let me show you the practical application, because knowing the theory is one thing, but knowing how to use it is everything. I want to walk you through 3 specific situations that come up regularly for people in my workshops. And these are situations where the skills I have just described are most likely to protect you. The first situation is meeting someone new in a social or romantic context. The second is evaluating whether someone in your existing life, a family member, a close friend, a financial advisor, is being fully honest with you. And the third is recognizing manipulation that is already in progress, sometimes in a relationship that has been going on for a long time. Let us start with meeting someone new. The first 3 minutes of any encounter are the most information-rich, because in those first 3 minutes, the person has not yet had time to fully calibrate their performance to you. They are still loading their social mask. And in those gaps, you will see the most authentic signals. What I want you to look for in that first 3 minutes is what I call emotional consistency. Is the warmth in their eyes matching the warmth in their words? Is the excitement that they are expressing actually visible in their body? The slight forward lean, the animated gestures, the genuine smile that reaches the corners of the eyes? Or is there a gap between the performance and the physical reality? One of the clearest early warning signs is what behavioral scientists call overconnection. This is when someone establishes intimacy unusually fast. They touch your arm in the first few minutes. They use your name repeatedly and warmly. They seem to understand you in an almost startlingly deep way very quickly, finishing your thoughts, validating your feelings, reflecting your own language back at you. Now, some genuine people are naturally warm and expressive, but overconnection, combined with a high level of attentiveness to your responses, almost like they are studying what works on you, is the behavioral signature of a skilled manipulator running an influence protocol. Your grandmother, and mine, were susceptible not because they were foolish, but because someone had studied exactly what buttons to press, and then pressed them with great precision. The second situation is evaluating an existing relationship. This is where many of my workshop participants find the most unexpected value, because they come in thinking they need to protect themselves from strangers, and they leave realizing that the person who has been quietly diminishing them for years is someone they already know well. Here's what I want you to do. Think of someone in your life with whom you sometimes feel smaller after an interaction than you did before. Someone whose approval you seem to need even though you are not quite sure why. Someone who makes you question your own memory or perception sometimes, or who seems to always have a reasonable explanation for why you are the one overreacting. This pattern has a name. It is called coercive control, and it works through a gradual process of reality distortion. The key behavioral signature is inconsistency combined with intermittent reward. The person alternates between warmth and coldness, approval and criticism, in a pattern that is unpredictable enough to keep you constantly working for the warm version. Your nervous system begins to treat their approval as a survival resource, and that is exactly what they want. The body language tells you everything here. Watch for what happens when you express an opinion they disagree with. Does their face show the contempt flash I described earlier? Do they use the dismissive hand wave, a literal sweeping motion away from their body, to signal that your perspective is not worth engaging? Do they shift to a lecturing posture, squared up, chin slightly elevated, voice dropping into the slower, deliberate pace of someone who has decided they are educating a child? These are not accidental behaviors. They are a behavioral system for maintaining dominance in a relationship. And once you can name them, they lose a significant amount of their power over you. Let me bring Sandra back, because I want to tell you what happened after that workshop. Sandra went home and did something I had suggested to everyone in the room. She spent 1 week simply observing without reacting. She stopped trying to analyze every conversation as it happened, which only made her anxious, and instead she started keeping a mental note of one thing after each interaction with the man she had been dating. She asked herself one question: do I feel more like myself after this conversation or less? Week 1. She noticed the answer was almost always less. Week 2. She started noticing the pattern I had described. He was warm and attentive when they were discussing something he wanted, a trip he wanted to take, a dinner he wanted her to host. He became vague and slightly cold during conversations that centered on her needs or her feelings. Week 3. She noticed the contempt flash. She saw it clearly for the first time during a conversation about her daughter. She had said something affectionate about her family, and for less than a second, his expression had shifted. Not to warmth, not to shared joy, to something else. That slight one-sided pull, that micro-signal that said, "I find this tiresome." She ended the relationship that week. He was furious, which was itself a data point, because people who genuinely care about you respond to rejection with sadness, not with anger designed to punish. 6 months later, she told me that was the most important skill she had ever learned. Not because it made her suspicious of everyone, but because, as she put it finally taught her to trust the signals she had been getting all along. Now I want to give you the bonus section I promised at the beginning, because there is one more layer to this system that most people in this field never talk about, and it is the one that Johns Hopkins University researchers identified in a landmark study on interpersonal trust. The study followed 847 adults over the age of 55 across an 8-year period, tracking their social relationships, their reported sense of safety with others, and their outcomes in terms of financial security, emotional well-being, and even physical health. What they found was striking. The people who fared best across every measure were not the most suspicious people. They were not the ones who had built walls and trusted nobody. In fact, those people fared quite poorly because isolation has its own costs. The people who fared best were the ones the researchers described as having calibrated openness. They had learned to hold warmth and discernment at the same time. They could be genuinely present with new people, genuinely interested and open, while running a kind of quiet background assessment based on behavioral evidence rather than words or feelings alone. This is the skill I want to leave you with today, and I want to be very direct about what it means in practice. It means learning to separate your emotional response to someone from your behavioral assessment of them. These are two different systems, and they need to operate independently. You can feel warmth for someone and still notice that their words and their body language do not match. You can like someone and still notice that their warmth turns on and off in a way that tracks too perfectly with their own needs. You can care about someone and still trust the data your limbic system is sending you, even when your conscious mind wants to explain it away. This is what I call the inner observer. It is the quiet part of your awareness that watches without judging, notes without reacting, and collects information without jumping to conclusions. And the more you develop it, the safer and the more genuinely connected you become. Here is how to start building it today. Step 1. Pick one interaction in the next 24 hours and decide in advance that you are going to spend 60 seconds afterward doing a simple 3-question review. First, did their nonverbal signals match their words? Second, did I feel more like myself or less like myself after this conversation? Third, was there anything that felt off, even slightly, that I would normally dismiss. You do not need to act on what you notice. Not yet. The first step is simply developing the habit of noticing. Step 2. Start paying attention to the feet. I know that sounds strange, but the feet are the most honest part of the body because people almost never think to control them. When someone says they want to stay and talk, but their feet are already pointed toward the door, believe the feet. When someone claims to be comfortable, but their feet are shifting and restless, believe the feet. The feet have very little interest in social performance. Step 3. Learn the contempt signal. Practice watching for it in low-stakes situations, in television interviews, in public conversations, anywhere you can observe people without pressure. Once your eye has locked in that one-sided mouth pull, you will start catching it in real life. And when you do, treat it as data, not as accusation. It might mean the person is feeling contemptuous in that moment about something completely unrelated to you, but it is information. Add it to your cluster. T409. Now, I know you might have questions about how to apply this to your specific situation, and that is exactly why I want you to do one thing before you close this video. Write down one name. One person in your life right now about whom you have a quiet, persistent discomfort that you have been explaining away. Not a stranger, someone you know. And ask yourself honestly, if I stopped dismissing that signal and treated it as real data, what would I want to investigate further? You do not have to do anything dramatic. You do not have to confront anyone or accuse anyone. Just stop dismissing the signal. Let it become a question instead of a feeling you push aside. Because here is what I know after 22 years of working in behavioral science. Your nervous system is a more sophisticated instrument than any technology I have ever seen. It processes thousands of microsignals simultaneously. It runs pattern recognition across decades of human experience. And when it sends you a message, that message is almost always worth reading. The problem is never your instincts. The problem is that nobody ever taught you to trust them. Today, I am telling you to trust them. Let me give you a quick summary of everything we covered. We talked about the 3-layer system for reading people. Layer 1, micro-expressions, especially contempt, that one-sided pull that signals superiority and disengagement. Layer 2, body language clusters, always looking for 3 or more signals, reinforcing the same message rather than interpreting gestures in isolation. And Layer 3, paralanguage, the vocal signature of deception, including pitch shifts, unnatural smoothness, and the absence of the ordinary imperfections that come with genuine memory. We talked about the warmth cluster and how to distinguish genuine warmth from performed warmth by watching variation. Specifically, whether the warmth is consistent or whether it appears and disappears in correlation with the person's needs. We talked about the baseline then deviate method for voice assessment. Build a vocal baseline in low-stakes conversation first, then listen for deviation when the stakes change. And we talked about the Johns Hopkins research on calibrated openness, the understanding that the goal is not to become suspicious, but to become discerning, to hold warmth and awareness at the same time. Sandra learned this in her 60s and said it was the most important skill of her life. You can learn it today. T409, closing into final CTA. Now, I want to give you one more thing before we finish. Because there is someone watching this right now, and I say this with complete sincerity, there is someone watching this right now who needed to hear it 6 months ago, maybe a year ago, maybe longer. And I do not want you to let this information go the way of a video you watched once and then forgot. I want you to share this with one person in your life who you know is trusting when they should be discerning, who you know has a quiet discomfort they have been dismissing, who you know would benefit from having a name and a framework for what they have already been sensing. Sharing this is not about being dramatic. It is not about making people paranoid. It is about giving someone you love the same thing I wish I had been able to give my grandmother before that phone call. the tools to read what is happening before it is too late. Do not let anyone tell you it is too late, because it is not. The signals are still there. The patterns are still visible. And now you know what to look for. I will see you in the next video.